Thanks to our friend Jonathan Lemire and his colleagues at Politico, we're learning more about what President Biden has to say and thinks about Donald Trump in private. John, you and your colleagues have new reporting on the language President Biden uses behind closed doors when talking about the former president.
We need to make John actually say the words.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, we almost did at the campaign stop. A couple of said he's a sick.
Well, yeah.
He stopped himself.
So get the delay ready.
He almost let it slip out last month while he was marking the 3rd anniversary of the attack on January 6th.
Trump and his MAGA supporters not only embrace political violence, but they laugh about it. At his rally, he jokes about an intruder, whipped up by the big Trump lie, taking a hammer to Paul Pelosi's skull, and echoing the very same words used on January 6th. Where's Nancy? And he thinks that's funny. He laughed about it. What a sick... My God. I think it's despicable, seriously.
He was right on the cuffs right there. In private, Biden, according to John and his colleagues, doesn't stop himself there. The president has described Trump to longtime friends and close aides as a sick, insert expletive, who delights in others' misfortunes. That's according to 3 people who've heard the president use the profane description.
I'm glad they gave us the F there before all the asterisks. Yeah. I was thinking sick puppy.
Yeah. One of the people who has spoken with the president said Biden recently used...
There it is.
Expletives when referring to Trump. Biden grew particularly incensed by reports of Trump refusing to visit a military cemetery in the rain and by stories that he has mocked the sacrifices of fallen American soldiers. We heard some of that anger in a speech last weekend in South Carolina.
Donald Trump, when he was commander-in-chief, refused to visit a cemetery, U.S. cemetery outside of Paris for fallen American soldiers. And he referred to those heroes, and I quote, as suckers and losers. He actually said that. He said that. How dare he say that? How dare he talk about my son and all of us like that? Look, I call them patriots and heroes. The only loser I see is Donald Trump.
You know, John, a lot of people, well, first of all, we'll have you talk about your reporting, but what I think why it's so important is because people are always asking, why is Biden running? Why is Biden running? I don't understand. He should have quit. He should just do his 40. He's running in part for the same reason he ran the first time. That was because of Charlottesville. And he's running this time because he thinks Donald Trump is a sick fella. And thinks that he's bad for America, thinks he's terrible for America. And just bluntly, he doesn't think anybody in the Democratic Party can beat him but him.
That's precisely right. He believes that Donald Trump is a danger to democracy. He believes his behavior is despicable and un-American. It is a personal affront to what Joe Biden believes this country should be about. And in my reporting, we learned there were a few things in particular that really set him off behind closed doors and lead to those profane outbursts. You mentioned Charlottesville, when Donald Trump defended people on both sides of that racist riot. That is what led Joe Biden to run in 2020. The reports that Donald Trump confirmed by the January 6th committee that Donald Trump sat and watched the insurrection from a private dining room just off the Oval Office, cheering them on, even rewinding some of the most violent parts. His warm words for Vladimir Putin, which Biden believes is simply unpatriotic. And then the 2 examples you just played there. The mockery of fallen American soldiers, which for President Biden is deeply personal because his son Beau Biden was stricken and died of cancer soon after returning from Iraq. And then the scene where Trump laughs and makes fun of and floats conspiracy theories about the attack of Paul Pelosi. And this is something the president feels behind closed doors, and it is fueling this run. And this is why he has told close aides he feels like he is the one man to beat Trump. He's done it before. He can do it again. It is deeply personal. And I'll say as a final note, the White House officially declined to comment on this story. They certainly didn't dispute it. But others in the Biden camp were very pleased to hear this come out because they say, look, the president is simply saying what a lot of Americans think.
This is a good story because it's just an obvious story. And you look at good stories within Washington or what people are talking about, but hasn't really broken out. And of course, Biden is calling Trump a sick because he is. Who has not basically by this point called Donald Trump that? So it's pretty obvious and pretty unsurprising.
I think it's relatable. I mean,
Yeah.
Biden's running for president. I think, he wants to be as relatable as possible. And there are a lot of Americans out there who probably see this as pretty cathartic.
And I think this may be one reason why the White House probably should let him out more. There's been concerns that he's not getting out, he's not doing enough stuff, he's not answering enough questions. All right, so if he makes a mistake, he makes a mistake. Like, Andy Card told Barnacle one time that the thing that people didn't get about Bush was when he bumbled around and wasn't perfect, wasn't Ronald Reagan. I'm talking about 43. Andy Card said it made him more relatable.
Yeah.
I saw in the polls that made him more. He wasn't speaking in flowery language. Like people felt like, okay, yeah, he's one of us. Well, that's Biden. So let Fox News make fun of him because he has the same stutter he had since he was 14 years old. But go out and show flashes of anger. That happened by the way, in 2020, he went after a guy in Iowa, almost called him a fat something, and he cut himself off. And they're actually, again, it showed a human side of him.
I was talking yesterday to someone who studies disinformation, misinformation, and kind of how people's perceptions get set in. And they were talking about how that people think about when there's a piece of information that's put out that's false. The instinct of politicians and communications offices is to go out and dispute that fact, to try and fact check it, right? And that, in fact, the way it works really in the world, what's better is to give people something else to think about, and something particularly that kind of implicitly disproves the first thing. So this person said, that when people talk about Biden's age, nothing does more to refute the notion that Biden's too old or not up to the job. Then, when you see him behind the wheel of a car with the aviators on, looking good, you don't go out and say, he's not old enough, he's fine. You show it, right?
Right.
And this is the kind of thing you're talking about, Joe. It's like you get him out there showing the anger, the passion. You don't argue about is he too old or does he still have it. You just go out and show that he's still has, and especially in a relatable way, that he's pissed off about the things that a lot of people are pissed off about. Right. And it just makes him seem, even if at that point, if he stumbles a little bit, people forgive the stumble when they see the passion and they hear words that sound normal, American, human to them, and everybody out there. We know it's like we're all on cable news. We're all kind of children about profanity. In the real life, we hear profanity every day, and no one cares. We don't bleep anything out. We don't put an asterisk. So people just go around and say these words. It's fine. It's good for him.
I didn't realize we were children.
I meant in the industry's thing of we can't say these words. No, we must bleep.
Well, I think that's probably good.
Yeah.
To not say that.
I don't know that I think
I've got a lot of children watching.
I don't think many people are offended by these words.
No.
Anymore.
That's why I don't. Well, I don't say them.
I know you don't. You're pure of heart. I actually want to ask Lemire this question, which is just for those of us who are students of profanity. Lemire, do you know, on the kind of the George Carlin scale of the 7, sometimes 10 words you can't say on television, how many of those Joe Biden likes to use and apply to Donald Trump? I wonder how deep the reporting goes here.
Well, we showed on the screen there the examples we cited for this story, but I think it's sort of a well-known secret, if you will, here in Washington, that President Biden is pretty salty behind closed doors. He does have a quick temper. He's the first to admit that. And he's pretty profane at times when he's fired up about something. And certainly he is about Donald Trump. And that's what people over and over told me. That, of course, Biden was horrified by Trump's actions, during the 2016 campaign and during his presidency. But in his post-presidency, even more so, the way Trump has treated these criminal trials. We have heard from him about E. Jean Carroll, everything connected to the insurrection, the warm words for Putin after the invasion, praising Hezbollah for being smart over and over and over. Biden just feels that Trump is unfit for office, and I'm told his pure loathing of the person, not just the politician, but the person of Donald Trump, has only grown.